Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I made you a video. I felt I had to come on today and talk about the announcement that the NHS will no longer routinely be prescribing puberty blockers to children in the UK. So this is great news, but the devil is in the detail and it doesn't go far enough. So let's get into it. First of all, let's look at the BBC. So the BBC reported yesterday that NHS England is to stop prescribing puberty blockers routinely to children. I'm going to read it out and pause and say stuff. So it says, NHS England to stop prescribing puberty blockers by Josh Parry, LGBT and identity producer. Why is he reporting on a clinical item? Where are your health correspondents? Children will no longer routinely be prescribed puberty blockers at gender identity clinics, NHS England has confirmed. The decision comes after a review found there was not enough evidence they are safe or effective. Puberty blockers, which pause the physical changes of puberty, will now only be available as part of research. It comes weeks before an independent review into gender identity services in England, is due to be published. An interim report from the review, published in 2022 by Dr. Hilary Cass, had earlier found there were gaps in evidence around the drugs and called for a transformation in the model of care for children with gender-related distress. Dr. Cass's review follows a sharp rise in referrals to the Gender Identity Development Service, GIDS, run by the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust, which saw an increase from 250 per year to over 5,000 in 2022. Puberty-suppressing hormones, more commonly known as puberty blockers, work by suppressing the release of hormones that cause puberty and are often prescribed to children questioning their gender as a way of stopping physical changes such as breast development or facial hair. Fewer than 100 young people in England are currently prescribed puberty blockers by the NHS. They will all be able to continue their treatment. So this is not in the article, this is me now. I heard that it's actually 83 children are currently being prescribed puberty blockers by the NHS. That is 83 children who are being medically abused. And this article is saying that the NHS intends to continue with that abuse. That's not okay. It's not okay that because they have activist parents or because they've been living a lie for so long that we inflict medical harm on them. It's not okay. Back to the article. NHS England held a public consultation on their usage and last year introduced an interim policy which stated they should only be given as part of research trials or in exceptional circumstances. So that they did a big review of guidance to inform the the Cass review, and that's still available on the web. If you should care to look at it, I'll drop a link in the description box. It's quite thorough, goes through each research trial in order, and every single one is there's nothing there. I mean, the risks of these treatments are so serious and the benefits so marginal and so contested. Anyway. The BBC understands that the new policy confirmed on Tuesday will not allow them to be prescribed routinely outside of a research trial, but that individual clinicians can still apply to have the drugs funded for patients on a case-by-case basis. I can't imagine what the clinical justification for that would be, because every single activist parent, every single Munchausen's by proxy parent is still going to insist that their child is the special one that the rules don't apply to. I would hope that doctors, medical ethicists are aware of their safeguarding responsibilities under the Children Act. Back to the article. GIDS is due to close at the end of March. 2 new NHS services due in London and Liverpool are set to open at the beginning of April, followed by a number of regional specialist centres over the next 2 years. They are designed to provide the holistic care that these children, that these children should have been given to begin with, because they're expressing their distress in terms of gender. What is the meaning of this behaviour? What is the meaning that they are trying to communicate through this behaviour? That's the question that should have been asked all along with all of these children, and which persists. Why have we got this explosion in numbers? Why have we got such a number of girls presenting with gender distress that have never been apparent before? I mean, we've got a fairly good idea, but we need to actually pin that down. So hopefully, now that GIDS is out of the picture, because GIDS were just terrible, they weren't tracking outcomes at all. Now that they're out of the picture, hopefully people will actually be able to monitor and track and research what is going on with this population of children. Back to the article. Health Minister Maria Caulfield said, "We have always been clear that children's safety and well-being is paramount. So we welcome this landmark decision by the NHS, ending the routine prescription of puberty blockers, will ensure that care is based on evidence, expert clinical opinion, and is in the best interests of the child." The consultation on the future of gender services received more than 4,000 responses, including 10% from trans adults and 5% from clinicians. As we know, adults that have special gender souls are very invested in these children. So, final paragraph. John Stewart, National Director of Specialist Commissioning at NHS England, said, "Given that the debate is often very polarised, so too with the responses to the consultation. That doesn't matter. You need to look at clinical evidence. It doesn't matter how great someone's feeling is. Many people said the policy didn't go far enough in terms of still allowing potential access to puberty blockers through research. Yes. And others saying clearly they disagreed fundamentally and that these should routinely be available to everyone who believes they need it. The BBC understands NHS England aims to begin its study into the use of puberty blockers by December 2024 and is yet to decide who can take part. I don't think any more children need to be harmed. None. We've already got data sets. We've already harmed enough children. I think we could probably interrogate those data sets and find out a lot of things. Let's follow up on the children that have been harmed already before we harm any more children, shall we? So, having dealt with the BBC report, I want to play you some segments that were played on BBC Radio yesterday on the programme PM with Evan Davis. And there's a couple of little bits, and then there's an interview with Hannah Barnes, and then there's an interview with Dr. David Bell. And I think it's worth listening to those, and I will add in anything that I want.
Lisa, thank you very much. Well, a decision that came in the last 90 minutes from NHS England, a decision that children attending gender identity clinics will not be prescribed puberty blockers. NHS England say they've carefully considered the evidence review conducted by NICE, the National Institute of Clinical and Health Excellence, in 2020, and has identified and reviewed any further published evidence available to date. We've concluded there's not enough evidence to support the safety or effectiveness of these puberty blockers to make the treatment routinely available at this time. Now, this has obviously been a hotly debated area. Non-medics have had a lot to say about it, and medical professionals too. The government has welcomed this decision from NHS England this afternoon, calling it a landmark decision. Let's get to the bottom of what's going on under all of this. From Hannah Barnes, Associate Editor of The New Statesman and author of Time to Think, a book about the Tavistock's Gender Identity Service, the service that is closing imminently and has been the monopoly provider of gender dysphoria services here. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us. We're trying to get our head around exactly what's been decided this afternoon. Can you talk us through what the practice was and what is now changing?
Sure. Well, like you, I've only had a limited time to look at these documents, but fundamentally, the whole pathway for puberty blockers for young people appears to be being closed. So at the moment, while GIDS is open, which it will remain so until the end of the month, it's been the case since about 2014 that any young person who has begun puberty and who meets certain criteria could be referred for treatment with puberty blockers to help treat their gender-related distress. And they're referred to endocrinologists at either UCLH, University College London hospitals in London, or to endocrinologists in Leeds. Now, what it says today is that any young person currently on blockers who is being seen at GIDS or who has been referred to endocrinology teams but hasn't yet started will not be affected. But what will happen come April the 1st, when these new services that were mentioned in the bulletin open, is that no child will be referred for treatment with puberty blockers. And what they've confirmed today, so we've known this for a little while, that this was the intention of NHS England, but what it's confirmed today is that regardless of whether a research study to look at the impact of puberty blockers gets approval or not, there will be no puberty blockers on the NHS fundamentally.
Right. Now, puberty blockers are not the only drug that are prescribed. There are cross-sex hormones as well. Is it all medical treatments for, say, trans teenagers that are being removed here, or are other treatments going to be given?
No, we haven't had an update on hormones yet. Now, what we have heard today, though, is that for biological males wanting to transition to be trans women, often, well, they will have to take puberty blockers as part of that feminizing process until, they have genital surgery, unless and until. So puberty blockers will still be available in that context. So alongside gender affirming or cross-sex hormones for natal males, alongside estrogen in that case. But we haven't heard, it doesn't appear that hormones are affected, and they will still be available in adult clinics, which now a young person can attend from the age of 17.
Right. I was going to ask you about the ages. What is a child for the purposes of today's statement? Do you know?
That's an interesting question. So the new services are for under 17s. So that's a change that's happened in the last year or so, that adult clinics have come all in line together, because it was the case that some started at 18 and a couple started at 17. But this new shake-up, adult services will take referrals now from 17-year-olds. So this is under 17s that are affected by this.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Now, Hannah, just very quickly, the process here, we have an inquiry. Hilary Cass produced an interim report. When was that? It must be almost 2 years ago. Was looking at really this whole area, very controversial area.
Yeah.
And we haven't had the full report. What is happening? Why the announcement now? Why not wait for the report to be published?
Well, you're right. It's exactly 2 years ago, in fact, since we had that interim report. And we are expecting the final report in April. And I can only, my best guess of why the announcement is now and not when Dr. Cass publishes that final report, is that, these new services are opening on the 1st of April. GIDS closes its doors for good on the 31st of March.
The Tavistock Gender Identity Service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess the decision was made that they had to put some information out there.
About what you get at those new services.
Exactly.
Hannah, thank you very much.
It's good to see that Hannah Barnes highlighted the fact that although children won't be prescribed puberty blockers routinely, the children that are already on the waiting list and the 83 children already being prescribed puberty blockers on the NHS will continue to have them prescribed. She also highlighted the fact that there's a plan to provide a loophole for boys who want to feminise their bodies, because when they're going to use cross-sex hormones, they're not going to be very impactful, given the enormous amounts of testosterone in the teenage boy's body, unless they're also on a puberty blocker of some kind. So they will need to be given puberty blockers in order to get the full impact of the feminization, which is essentially code for teenage boys that want to grow boobs. So they want to be able to grow the largest natural boobs that they can. So whereas, teenage girls are probably thinking very carefully about the impact of birth control, because, the extra hormones is not necessarily good for your mental health. It's not necessarily good for you long term in terms of certain cancers. But for boys, it's absolutely fine. Absolutely ram them full of estrogen and make sure you block the testosterone that their body actually needs at this point in their development. It's medical malpractice, it's unethical, it's medical abuse, that battle is still to be fought. So I'm glad she explained that we are still waiting for the CAS review, but this information had to come out because of GIDS being closed imminently, because all of the new services needed to have their specifications tightened up ahead of that time. Really great interview from Hannah Barnes there. Not many notes at all. She is well on top of her brief, and she's exactly the sort of person you should call when you've got 90 minutes to get a programme together. Okay, let's listen to Dr. David.
Thank you so much for talking to us. What do you make of the decision that's been made this afternoon?
Well, first of all, can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, no, good line. Yeah, carry on.
Could I just introduce myself a little more fully? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Just to say that I recently retired from the Tavistock, where I'd worked for 25 years as a consultant, and I was a governor of the trust. I represented the staff, that's the academic and clinical staff.
Yeah.
And it was in that role that I wrote the report in 2018, raising very serious concerns about the mistreatment of children and young people by the GIDS service. And that was part of the whole process that led to increasing public concern, then concern by the NHS England and the setting up of the CAS review and so on. So the concerns that I and others raised way back then have been very much validated by the interim CAS review and by the decisions of NHS England.
And does this deal with your concerns? Are there remaining concerns you have? Obviously, a lot of the concerns built up around an absolute explosion in the number, particularly of teenage girls coming forward, and
yes,
it was a rather unexplained phenomenon.
I think it's important to just set this in the context. Puberty blockade was being given, so that's preventing children going into puberty, in the context of a service that was providing, as CAS has well acknowledged, and so has the NHS, the wrong treatment. So it's not just that they were being given puberty blockers, is that for reasons that we understand to some extent, that is because of the inappropriate penetration of a kind of ideology that seemed to overwhelm ordinary clinical practice, that children and young people who presented with multiple problems, that is depression, histories of trauma, profound family disturbances, 35% autism or on the autistic spectrum, many just lost and alone, many had suffered serious problems at school and so on. All these problems were presenting as a problem of gender. And then that, as the CAS put it, overshadowed all the other problems that weren't addressed. And there was a rather crazy idea that if we trans these children, all the other problems will go away. So these children suffered in two ways. One, they got what we now realize is the wrong treatment, which has considerable risks. And two, the other problems that they had were not being addressed.
Right.
And we need to know that these children in the future will be properly looked after. There are also grave concerns about the 17 to 25-year-olds for whom we have similar concerns, but CAS wasn't able to address in her report, but has mentioned this problem.
And David, as I understand it, this is actually reading from the Press Association copy. The NHS says children attending the new clinics will be supported by experts in neurodiversity, paediatrics and mental health, resulting in a holistic approach to care. So that is essentially what you're saying they should have been given, rather than a gender-focused approach or a gender-exclusive approach.
Yes, that's correct. I think I would just correct you on one minor thing. Is you said transgender children. As I see it, and I think as Cass would see it, it's completely wrong to refer to a child as a transgender child. We talk about children.
Okay, I thought I thought I said children identifying as transgender, but I might have.
But what we say is these are children who are expressing their distress.
And I understood you made that point, and it is very clear, as you put it, as what your diagnosis is of that. Can I just ask you whether there is a danger, when you say it's not trans, it's not about gender, and we shouldn't have been treating gender, it's about all the other things, whether there are going to be children who are trans who are going to get told that you have to go through, a whole lot of things, when actually the gender dysphoria is what their actual issue is?
Well, let me say this. Gender dysphoria is a symptom. So to call it trans is to close it down.
Okay, I'm just for the sake of a conversation that has to be very quick. Is there a danger that we know
that the majority of children who present with gender distress will desist. They will change their minds.
And what about the minority? So what I'm asking is about the minority. Is there I'm wanting your opinion of this. Is there a minority who will now not get the treatment that would be ideal for them?
No, because we do not know what that treatment is without watching and waiting for at least a year or two to understand what's behind it all. So that's the wrong way of looking at it. Given that we know the majority of children will desist, it is much better for all that we watch, wait, and explore and understand, rather than put them on a medical model. We now know that 80% of children, 98% of children who were put on puberty blockers were progressing to opposite sex hormones. That is because once you start them, you can't stop it. And that's what this ruling has recognised. You should not start them on this medical pathway, which is often irreversible and has long-term consequences, which we're still learning about, some of which are severe. They include bone mineralization, possibly effects on brain development, and so on.
David
This
Bell?
has been a totally inappropriate treatment.
David Bell, thank you so much for joining us.
Good for Dr. David Bell for recognising that it was partly his whistleblowing that led to the brouhaha around the criminal negligence at GIDS, which has inevitably led towards the Cass review and the closure of GIDS. He highlighted how puberty blockade was being given in the context of a service giving the wrong treatment. So it was like going in there with a broken leg and coming out there with an x-ray of your left arm. Just like a completely inappropriate treatment for, a group of psychologists who had a perfectly ordinary psychological practice that they were able to employ, and they just didn't. They just didn't, because they were captured by an ideology that meant that they had to provide these children with completely wrong treatment. So you've got all these children going in there with either histories of abuse or autism or other kinds of neurodiversity or loneliness or depression or whatever it is. And they all came out with an x-ray of their left arm, no matter what they went in with. It's just absolutely, like, they are going to have such a lot of people suing them over this. I mean, these people have had their lives ruined. Anyway, he also mentions that we're still concerned about the people aged 18 to 24. They're not children, but they're vulnerable. Your brain is still developing. You are not actually equipped to make decisions about your future fertility, about everything to do with, your bone mineralization risks and your cognitive impairment that you'll get later on in life. Never mind the impact of the various surgeries which will be pushed on you as soon as you've agreed to all the other things. So anyway, he is right. That battle is still to be won too. He also, very importantly, made it very clear there is no such thing as the trans child. There is no trans children out there. these are distressed children. The distress is real. These children are very distressed, and they are communicating an extreme level of distress. What they are not communicating is that they have a special gender soul or a special identity that has to override the safeguards which are dependent on their biological sex, because of course that's nonsense. That's an absolutely anti-scientific, anti-safeguarding nonsense, and it's an absolute wonder that this ideology has lodged itself in our institutions, and it is going to take all of us to winkle it out. Anyway, he highlights that the treatment that these children actually need is watchful waiting with psychological intervention in the meantime, to actually work out a formulation of how to help these children going forward with their various problems. Because another feature is that a lot of these children were originally referred to their community mental health teams locally, but as soon as they said the magic word gender, their community mental health team ticked them off their list and sent them off to GIDS, which meant that there was one more problematic child that they didn't have on their caseload. But that, you know, these children didn't have their depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive behaviours treated by GIDS. They were just given the option of puberty blockade, and your answer lies in the great god gender. So it's really important that Dr. David Bell hammered that point home, although Evan Davis just didn't get it, because that's not talked about in the dinner parties in North London that he's likely to attend. You know, his daughter's friends several of them are likely to have been foreclosed in this way. I'm going to come on to this concept of foreclosure in a minute, because it's really, really significant. But thanks to Dr. Bell for highlighting that these are very real risks to your physical and psychological well-being, and they are not being we're not being hyperbolic when we're saying, you know, this is absolutely criminal medical malpractice which has gone on unchecked. Now we're checking it. Now we're trying to put those safeguards in place, and there will be a wailing and gnashing of teeth, but that's inevitable, because that always happens when you try and draw back a boundary which someone has successfully pushed against. I like this tweet by Dr. P, or at PsychGirl211, who highlights that she didn't think Dr. Bell made it clear enough that the concept of the trans child is a damaging concept, as it accepts a form of psychological foreclosure that we can call gender foreclosure. So I'll drop a link to that tweet in the discussion box. But what we're actually talking about here is identity development, and it's one of the areas of psychology which is actually really well understood. It's been studied for many, many years, and this stuff is stable over time. I mean, this stuff has stood for like 60 odd years now, and it's never been contradicted by anybody. You know, this is as near as you're going to get to truth. And one of the most significant psychologists was Erikson. I've covered him before, but just a brief overview. Erikson believed that identity is formed through a process of exploring options and choices and committing to an option based on the outcome of the exploration. And he believed that there were like 8 stages of development, and one of the most significant ones was the one that happens in adolescence. And the specific task is in adolescence was establishing your identity, and it was basically important for adolescents to try out lots of different roles, have lots of things available to them as role models, have lots of options to explore without actually foreclosing or closing down any of those options ahead of time. So he believed that successful completion of each developmental task built on the others, resulting in a sense of competence and a healthy personality. The adolescence task is identity over role confusion. So then came along somebody called Marcia, who built on Erikson's work further, and they described identity formation as involving both exploration and commitment. So you could have it's a kind of grid thing. So you're supposed to be going through the process of exploration, which is called moratorium. And at the end of it, you would come out with a kind of achievement. If you foreclose on that, if you enter a state of foreclosure because you're making a commitment without doing the exploration, then that's a dead end. You know, you're not actually setting yourself up for the next developmental task over your lifespan, because it doesn't end at adolescence. We have to still address all the challenges of families and aging and all the rest of it right through life. So there's a link to some more information about this in the description box if you're interested in reading further. We are positing something called gender foreclosure, which we are stating that adolescents could be in. So psychological foreclosure is already a well-established concept, comes from Marcy's work building on Erickson's work. We can apply this to gender and call it gender foreclosure, is what I'm saying. And if an adolescent person has latched onto a gender identity and has closed down the idea of exploring other options of what if I am actually maybe a girl and maybe my abuse is why I hate my breasts, or maybe my autism is why I have sensory issues with X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's because of my age that I can't imagine being a mother and wanting to have children of my own. So there's a great thread that I want to reference, which is by @prof_curiosity1, whose nickname is Read Some Piaget Please, which I love. And I love this thread. So I'm going to read this out to you. So this is a thread from back in May 2023, but it's a really good thread. The idea of a child with an innate fixed gender identity is perhaps the most laughable fiction that has emerged from the trans activist lobby. It is certainly the most damaging, as it provides the basis for gender affirmative care for children. It is also codswallop. First, it presupposes that a child has such a thing as an innate gender identity. The evidence for such a construct is laughably thin compared to the overwhelming evidence that gender identity is an external construct imposed on children. None of the great child development theorists, brackets Piaget, Kohlberg, Vygotsky, etc., close brackets, discovered this magical innate construct, despite researchers spending years studying child development and sex and gender roles. The innate gender identity would have stuck out like a sore thumb. The idea of a fixed gender identity is equally risible. All parents and theorists agree that childhood is an extremely dynamic time. Children's brains and bodies are developing and changing at an extraordinary rate. How does gender identity alone remain fixed? Extraordinary. First, let's look at identity itself. Erickson studied this concept extensively and defined identity as the fundamental organising principle which develops constantly throughout the lifespan. This is a reasonable introduction, and there's a link there to an article. Again, there is no space for the idea of a fixed or innate gender identity. If such a thing existed, Erickson and his researchers would have found it. Instead, he concluded that identity develops constantly throughout the lifespan. The closest that a theorist, James Marcier, came to describing this fixed gender identity is that of identity foreclosure, which I just discussed, where the child or adolescent has their identity chosen from them. What better description of gender identity ideology could there be? So what that means is that there weren't like an unlimited number of options available, that you just present the child with one option, like you're going to be a fisherman, your father's a fisherman, your grandfather's a fisherman, we live at the seaside, we got a boat, you go out in the boat every day, you're a fisherman. Like, you're not going to be able to like explore all of the multiplicity of options available to you as a human because you're a fisherman. It's kind of that. Summary. The idea that a child has an innate fixed gender identity is evidence-free. It is an ideological construct imposed on children to fulfill an ideological goal that transgenderism in adults is worthy of serious concern by policymakers. It has given birth to the trans child fabrication, which has become the most successful and damaging marketing tool that gender identity ideology possesses. But without the existence of an innate fixed gender identity, the trans child construct is unsustainable. Brilliant. Such a good thread. Really, really good. So, as I said, the NHS has already released the review of the evidence into the efficacy of puberty blockers. That was prepared to assist Dr. Hilary Cass in her review. There is no evidence for any provision of puberty blockers, and there is, evidence of some significant risks, particularly cognition and bone mineralisation, stuff like that. So I'll drop a link to the evidence review in the description box if you want to read it for yourself. You're very welcome. So we're anticipating the final report by Dr. Hilary Cass, and we don't want to accept these exceptions which are being presented to us. For some reason, haunted schoolmaster David Hayton has once again been given a national platform to profit from the tireless campaigning of women and discuss puberty blockers being no longer routinely prescribed. I'll drop a link for it in an archive because I don't want to reward them. He's arguing that puberty blockers shouldn't be given to children, which just highlights how insane it is that he believes that providing an AGP as a role modelling opportunity supports healthy psychological development for the children that he teaches, because that is, in essence, what he's doing is encouraging an identity foreclosure, because he's saying this is your option. This is what you could grow up into, lads. And that's not good for children. That's not a safeguarding first attitude, and it's incoherent. So once again, it falls to the wonderful women to take a safeguarding first approach. I want to highlight this tweet by Isla. On this special day of the NHS no longer prescribing puberty blockers for kids, since nothing has changed since the interim judgment. Interim judgment last year. Oh, my battery's working overtime. Why aren't you raging that hundreds of children will still be sterilised and robbed of sexual function via clinical trials? What about those children? Those confused and gay and autistic kids? All it takes is an activist parent to insist. Safeguarding first, people. This isn't a good day. It's more mediocre than last year. We didn't come into this to save one child, but to save them all. At least that was my goal. My wish would be for non-clinical commentators who think that clinical trials on kids are okay to stand down. Also, the highly respected social scientists who are published and journalists but seem to think it's okay to rob children of sexual function for a good article, stand down. We don't give a shit for your career. Come on, people. We want all the kids out of this. Couldn't agree more with you, Isla. And at Leaky Like, Marjorie Hutchins says, no child in the UK should be put on these dangerous drugs due to distress, delusion, confusion or unmet needs. This prescribing needs to be stopped entirely via private prescriptions as well as NHS. All children must be safeguarded from clinical abuses and medical negligence. Yeah, we haven't even touched on the whole fact that they'll still be able to access these private prescriptions from the likes of you-know-who. And she goes on in another tweet, why on earth does the NHS think it's appropriate to arrest the puberty of distressed, likely gay or autistic boys at 16 with puberty blockers in order they may develop fake boobs with hormones? These are children. Who benefits from such body modification and arrested development of vulnerable boys? always with the critical questions. You have to follow her if you're not following her already. And Isla too, brilliant. So I just want to close by saying that we already have the legal and policy framework we need to safeguard these children. We don't need to entertain the possibility that they have, that because they have some form of gender foreclosure, that they need to be exposed to further medical malpractice, medical harm. The only justification to do so is to appease activist parents and dialogues and those with a prurient interest in boys with boobs. Boys with boobs and limited cognitive capacity. Safeguarding first, people. Not one more child. Thanks for watching today's video. As ever, you know where to find me. You know what I do. Yeah, buy me a coffee if you like. But I wouldn't expect you to because I haven't done a video for an absolute age. Other things that I'm doing, I've just started a TikTok for my Fox videos because I think that I'm trying to like make a different platform for doing that because I bore people to death with photos and videos of my foxes. So yeah, you might want to look at that. I don't even know what my TikTok is. It's like the Fox Lady, _Fox Lady, I think. I don't know. I'll drop a link in the description box if you're interested. Anyway, I'll try and make another video soon because I know that we need to discuss, the next thing we need to discuss is Liz Truss's bill, and that's coming down the pipe. It's going to be debated on Friday. So take care, and I'll see you all soon.